So, anyways, like the title that kind of stuck with me. I'm not opposed to changing it, but no clue drift crew.
Okay.
Brought to you
Okay.
by Part Shop Max
Yeah.
is kind of like it's lighthearted, and
As long as they don't think we don't have a clue.
well, if they start listening and we start answering
Right.
questions, then they know that we have the clue. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I see where you're going.
many people have just like no idea, and I think that we can just offer a lot of value and kind of like revisiting things that we might not even think about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
However, since we're rolling, I should introduce Tommy Roberts. He is the handsome guy that you've read about in reviews on Google searching where to find Part Shop Max, and then you can see that handsome face as soon as you walk in the door. He is on the computer answering emails, processing orders, answering text messages and calls that come in on the shop phone, which is an iPhone. And you're welcome to send him photos of whatever part it is that you need, whatever tiny little component. Even if you have no idea what that thing is called, you can just kind of like take a photo, mark it up, send it to Tommy, and make sure that you tell him your address, and he'll get you a shipping quote. And I think that besides people loving Tommy for those virtues, I think that I've referred to Tommy as like the oracle of the drifting community, or just Uncle Tommy, referring to his seniority. So before Tommy was at Part Shop Max, he was an ASE certified mechanic for Nissan, and he even worked as a service manager, which I can only imagine like all the angry customers and what he had to go through.
Yeah, definitely. That was a stressful one.
But I'll let him tell a little bit about himself.
Yeah, I've known you since I was in high school. So, I mean, I got into drifting really early on. I was in middle school, when I really started getting into the drifting stuff. And then obviously, a couple more years till I got my own car and started going down that route of actually driving. But I met you and the guys. We had the shop in Miramar that you were at, and I remember signing up for a drift event that you were actually running, Drift Circuit. And
did you always have the S13 like since?
Yeah, I got that in senior year of high school. So I picked that thing up for like $1,000 from another friend. Yeah, and it was super cherry, like all stock body. I think it had like one scratch on the bumper, so I was like able to like talk it down a little bit. I don't know, a little scratch on the bumper might only be worth $1,000. So yeah, I've had that since high school.
That's wild.
I remember seeing you guys around at like meets and stuff, I'd see Dave in that SC300, like going to a meet or something. And then I kind of knew about you guys, and you were, throwing a drift event. I remember having my mom go drop off a payment for my entry fee.
This is Drift Circuit.
Yeah.
At the San Diego Sports Arena, aka
Qualcomm Stadium, yeah.
AKA that place that they smashed and made Snapdragon.
Yeah, Snapdragon
Stadium.
Now. Yeah. But it's been a long journey.
Drift Circuit.
Yeah. I wish that we had something in San Diego, man, but
yeah,
it's weird. There's so many good drifters from San Diego over the years, and I don't really understand why or how, but there's been a lot of really good guys, even though we never really had a track or a place even nearby.
I love going to Apple Valley Speedway. I think it's great that it has a bunch of turns, and I like the tight technical course, and you can still string it out like on the straight.
Yeah.
Somebody sent me a screenshot, and it said that Willow Springs has been bought by some private equity firm, and they gave the current tenants a notice to move out. And then I just replied to that screenshot, and I'm like, WTF does that mean? Does that mean houses?
Ooh, yeah, there's people that have there's like shop spaces that people rent. So like, Taka has his drift school.
Right.
Naoki has his drift school, Drift 101. And then there's guys that have shops, so they build cars. You know, like when you're driving up to the gate, you see all those shops on the left.
Yeah. But
those are all rented
does that
out.
mean tenants, or it means the current people that are like occupying, managing, and maintaining?
Ooh, yeah, I don't know the details.
Running
on
the racetrack itself.
that. Yeah, because you see those little.
It's kind of a disturbing headline.
Yeah, and nobody really knows what they're going to do with it, right? Like, did they buy it out and they're going to refurbish it, or are they going to buy it out and close it up? I don't think that land's like super useful for anything else at this point.
Dude, over the years of going to Willow Springs, I've definitely seen, like, for it being in the middle of nowhere, there has been houses getting closer and closer and closer.
True.
And you know what happens is that, like, they build houses close enough, and then the people living in those houses, those idiots, start to complain about the noise, even though they opted to, like, buy a house right next to a racetrack.
Right.
And then suddenly they, like, all petition for the racetrack to get closed down. It's like the classic thing.
Super
it's like
classic.
It's like a Cajon Speedway, right?
Yep.
Oh yeah. Over and over again.
Yeah. But
so being at the helm and talking to customers every single day, what comes across your desk that you think is on like total repeat? Like there's no possible way that you can answer enough phone calls to like actually have this like become common knowledge.
Right.
Even though you get asked all the time, and I'm sure that, you know, that has just enriched a lot of people's lives, maybe saved their backs.
Right. Yeah, I think we've kind of had this conversation, you know, over lunch before, but yeah, I mean, so many people call me asking about advice on spring rates. You know, we sell coilovers and have since day one, and we've always tried to choose like a standard spring rate that we think a lot of our customer base would like, and I think that we definitely focus our brand and our parts towards sort of the low style drift cars and always have, right? Like drift and VIP style cars. And so, you know, we do our best to say like, this is how most of our customers are trying to set up their car. And these are the spring rates and the shock tuning that we think is going to work best for that sort of situation. But
we've actually packaged that like 3 different ways.
Yeah.
So
like, yeah, sure. Some of them come softer and some of them come short,
right.
stiffer because.
So we got a pro coilover, and then that'll have like a softer spring rate. If you have like a lot of power and you need to put it to the ground and get traction, you know, then that might be a couple kg less. And then we'll have a comp coilover, which is just, you know, if you have like a low power car, that extra couple kg spring rate, you know, just makes it easier to slide your car. And then we even have some VIP coilovers, you know, for like big body Lexus, and you know they've definitely got like upgraded springs.
Right.
But when you get the call, what does it sound like?
It sounds like one of 2 ways. I think a funny one to me is just straight up, what's the stiffest spring that you guys sell? What's the stiffest
like
one I
point
can put on my
blank.
car? Yeah,
like
just
no,
like question number 1. Hey, I want to buy coilovers.
No context.
Cool.
Oh, okay.
What's the stiffest spring that I can get? So that's a funny one.
Wait, do you know the car though first, or just...
Oh no. It doesn't even matter to a lot of people. You know, they just want to know what the stiffest one is. And actually, to my surprise, so after, you know, several years of this question, like I've actually gotten to see what people do with their cars, and like there are some times where no, it truly is necessary because they're doing something to the extreme where they really do need something extreme.
So how do you describe that extreme where you know that you're selling the 50 kg spring to the right guy?
Sure. I mean, I think that the biggest part for like having extremely stiff suspension would just be if you had like wheel poke. That would be the number 1 reason to do that, right? If your wheel
I call it lip outfitment.
Yeah.
Where if your suspension moves too much, like that fender that is wedged in between your stretch tire and your lip sticking out of the car, that will impact your fender and crunch it. It'll
come up and it'll ruin your paint. It'll ruin your fender. Absolutely. Then you just need your suspension to not move, or very minimally. So yeah, in those situations, it's important to be able to offer that to people. That is a huge part of our customer base. But then on the other hand, there's just extremely low ride height where the wheels tuck, and this is kind of where it's funny. So, you know, a lot of people will just want to lower their car significantly, which I get, and we do offer coilovers that do that, right? We try to make them short enough so you can slam your car in most cases, and put like a relatively aggressive spring rate on there. And but then people will automatically assume that they need an extremely stiff spring to be able to achieve that look. And that's usually not the case. So if your wheel's tucked into your fender, then when your suspension compresses, your wheel's just going to go up into the fender. Nothing's going to get damaged. It's going to be fine. So you
right,
could
the car's
still,
not going to be damaged.
Yeah.
I guess the fine line is scraping the ground at that point. Mm-hmm. Like if your wheel's tuck, then
yeah, if the car dips,
there's no binding.
Yeah, the car dips down and like your front lip could smack something, but that probably has less to do with the spring rate and more to do with just like the physical clearance to the road, because you're not going to be like on the freeway with the suspension dipping down so much that your front bumper hits the ground. It's really when you're in turns and things like that you'd be more worried about that, right?
Yeah, so you can like actually get down on the ground, like look at the clearance between your subframe or the lowest point on the car. Mm-hmm. Could be your oil pan. Hopefully not.
Yeah, hopefully not. But it often is.
Yeah, and then just see what that situation looks like versus the suspension binding up on something or the tire hitting something.
Yeah.
So what, like, how do you steer that conversation, like, from some misunderstanding or what they think they should do to have like a slammed car versus like what they should do?
So I think lately I've been really trying to get people to like send me pictures of cars that they're trying to emulate that style. Cause it is kind of hard to explain these things just through words over the phone sometimes. So I'm like, okay, you say you want your S13 to be a certain ride height. Can you send me a picture of a car that you really admire that you're trying to emulate that style? Send me a picture of that and maybe I can kind of better understand what you're trying to do. And usually I can tell them, okay, yes, you do in fact need to be a little bit more aggressive than what comes in the box.
So when you see that photo, are you looking for like a spoke tucking up into like the rear wheel well? Or
sure,
like you're seeing if you can, like, if there's like a 3 fingers worth of tire sticking out?
Yeah, there's those things, but also like different people have different opinions about what low is, right? Like you'll say, oh, like my car is super slammed, and I'm like, okay, well, send me a picture, and really it's not. You can put your fingers between the tire and the fender, but that's low compared to the stock car, or maybe it's low compared to like what that person has done in the past. They have in their mind that it's low, but in fact that's maybe what we already anticipated when we designed the coilovers. Right. When we chose the spring rates that are in the box, we already thought that you were probably going to have your car like that, because that's kind of the style that we're going for. And maybe you're not doing anything too out of the ordinary, so it doesn't require anything out of the ordinary. But yeah, having a visual on it really, really helps. And this isn't talking about like handling characteristics either. So there's a whole nother conversation that we can have about proper, racing suspension and drifting suspension and suspension geometry.
So the first question was the look.
Yeah, I think that starting this conversation, I was kind of going to this as like, when somebody calls me like, hey, I have a street car, I'm going for a certain aesthetic with it, I want a certain look to my car, and then they start talking about spring rates and the shock length and things like that. So yeah, that's just part of the conversation.
But we sort of like touched on that very briefly, like when we were talking about like the pro coilover and what the handling characteristics of that would be.
Yeah. So, well, I guess that was like another side. So you asked me what's, a common question with the springs, and I was saying the number one is the guy who asks what's the stiffest I can do. But the other one is just what spring rate should I get? And so that conversation,
it's kind of like, what do you do with the car? That's not the photo question.
Yeah. So this conversation is more like, okay, yeah, we have to talk about your use, what engine you have. Are you running sway bars? Do you have an angle kit with extended arms that change the leverage on the spring? What's the ride height? How much travel are you looking for? There's so many things to consider when you're choosing springs and shock lengths and shock tuning for a drifting car that serves a very specific purpose, or a road race car that serves a purpose.
So a more qualified question when somebody gets a hold of you should be something like, I've got an S13 and I'm buying a set of coilovers, but I have a 2J engine and I'm kind of pointing myself towards competition drifting. Yeah. I'd like to enter in some of that stuff. And, should I just uprate the front springs 2 kg?
Right. So that's funny. Years ago when we first got into this stuff, people were doing, RB swaps, JZ swaps, whatever. Maybe it wasn't as common as it is now, but there was always this notion that if you were to put that sort of engine in the front of your S chassis, for example, that you're like ruining the balance of the car and the handling of the car. And, yes, it will affect it, but there's things you can do to sort of band-aid that or get around it, like choosing the right spring rate. And if you can actually support the front of the car and not have it be too, divey in the front when you get on the brakes and things like that, you can really restore a lot of the handling balance of the car. So now I think people in general know that you can put a JZ in the front of an S chassis and it'll be an awesome car. It's like super competitive. It's one of the most popular ways to do it now. And that just really comes down to like people choosing the right suspension setups, and then they're able to get those cars to work properly, even with that extra weight in the front. So yeah, I think giving me information like that ahead of time really helps. If you get the right spring rate, or at least in the right ballpark, it'll get you kind of set in the right direction. And then after you get some track days under your belt with that setup, you can maybe make some educated changes. But yeah, usually we can get you in the right ballpark just with some basic information like that.
Do you think it's good to just like if you have a V8 or a JZ, do you think it's good to just like try them as is?
Maybe that comes down to the spring rate or the ride height too, right? Going back to, well, drifting is kind of a weird thing where a lot of cars, they're not always set up for optimal performance. There's also a look that you're going for, and there's just like an aesthetic that you really like and you want to drift the car. So, yeah, I mean, I have plenty of guys, for example, have a 1J swap S13. They run the normal 8 or 10 kg front springs, and they're actually more than happy with it. It's fine. The car works fine. They street drive it. They take it to the track. Then I have guys running 12 kg, 14 kg. They all like that even better, or maybe even something stiffer than that. So there's a little bit of preference going on there. Maybe one guy's running a sway bar, one guy isn't.
So when you say running a sway bar, you are talking about how some of the steering response and the anti-roll is actually dictated by the rate of the spring. Mm-hmm. So if you had a soft spring, your car can still steer very quickly and have the steering response that you want due to the anti-roll bar,
right?
But not necessarily because of the spring. And then like if a bump hits that individual wheel, you can still maintain traction. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you uprated the spring, you might actually prefer no front sway bar.
Sure, but then they also have different effects on the handling of the car too. So you can't just say that if you take off your bar, that having a stiffer spring is now the car is gonna ride the same, because now what about dive under braking and certain things like that. So I mean, they do have different effects on the way that the car handles and drives, but yeah, it's just another thing to consider when you're making all these choices.
So I think that that's where maybe in a competition car, a soft spring for grip, and then a stiff sway bar would get you what you need for snappy response.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's also different people have different ways that they like to drive, and some people like the front end to have a bit more feel to it, and maybe they need some more weight transfer over the front end, and then other people like to drive with the back of the car, and they can just throw some stiff suspension in the front, and it actually works really well for them too. So there's, I guess, over listening to so many podcasts and interviews and people talking and social media posts, there's a lot of people that really swear by certain ways to set up cars, and they're very adamant that this is the way that things need to be done. And I think that we've just found over the years that there's just so many different ways to do things, and different tracks that people are driving at. Some people only go to banks, some people only go to go-kart tracks that are second gear, third gear. Some people have big flat tracks. Some people, there's so many things that you can set the car up for, and what works at one place might not work at another place. You could be changing the alignment and the geometry from one place to the next. You could change your spring rates from one place to the next. There might be a big bump going, from the bank to the infield at some tracks, where now all of a sudden you have to slam through that. And that wasn't accounted for at the last track, because the last track didn't have that big bump. So there's just so much to consider. But that's what's really nice about having coilovers too. You can actually just change that. Once you have a proper set of coilovers on there, we have a whole shelf full of different springs that you can swap on there. Once you know how to do it, it takes about 2 minutes. Right. You have a knob on top that you can turn that makes a huge difference.
So speaking of that knob, there's been kind of an evolution in the tuning of our shocks, and you personally have tons of experience rebuilding shocks, whether it was taking phone calls for years about, people's like wild ideas about what spring rate that they want to run. And darn well that, the shim stack has to be retuned in order to handle that spring rate and not just, go out and have a short lifespan, to request from pro drivers like Matt Field. And then all of that kind of inspired our ultra high range adjustable damper, which definitely saved you a lot of rebuild work.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of your experience as far as like, like all the requests that you took and like rebuilding and then like where we're at today on that.
I think that our shock tuning over the last, almost 10 years that I've been here, it's changed here and there, and we'll, make small little differences on certain generations of shock. And like you said, we have the difference between the comps and the pros. So, we would have the comp coilover might have a little bit of a stiffer spring, a little bit of a stiffer shock, a little bit more aggressive. And then on the pro coilover, we would, like, for example, in the rear of the S chassis, we would make that quite a bit softer and get them back to move around a bit more. And then we'd offer that to more like serious drift guys. So that was working for most people. But then, like, there's still, going back to the beginning of the conversation, there's still guys that are doing something completely out of the ordinary, and that's just not going to work for them anymore. We'd have to, take the shocks apart and restack the shim stacks, and we had a couple different pistons to choose from, and try to get like the tuning back into the correct window. Like if you want to put 20 kg on an S chassis front and back because it's more of a stance car, you're just going to need something that's going to keep the car from bouncing around on that with that super stiff spring.
And we have a shock dyno with like a whole collection of models in there so that we can, test them, and that kind of gives us a clue about.
Yeah. And then after doing a bunch of them, you can kind of say like, okay, like this shim stack and this tune worked really well for this car that was very similarly sprung, similar style of geometry, whether it's double wishbone or McPherson. And then we can kind of apply that and like kind of streamline that a little bit. But it really does take a long time. And, we have so many things going on here every day, just running the business and keeping things going day to day. And to open up a set of shocks and completely retune them it can be pretty time consuming and messy. We've definitely made a slick mess of that room.
Oh man. Yeah.
Not
to
like
mention
oil on the ceiling, and you walk in and get dripped on your hair and you're like, what is that? And there's oil up on the ceiling.
On the customer side of things, they have to take their car apart, like extract the shock, send it in, like make the request, wait for the retune, and then we'll send it back. Whereas what we're doing lately with the ultra high range adjustable dampers is we noticed that we could stack up the shim stack to handle really high kg springs, but the section of the graph that was available on the soft side wouldn't change that much. So as we stack it up, it's kind of like adding to the high side, and it's not taking away anything from the low side. So part of the concept with the ultra high range adjustable damper is that we went from 12 clicks to 32. And by the way, that means absolutely nothing as far as like how much adjustability the shock has.
Well, that's funny because we used to have that conversation too, where we'd be like, well, our coilovers only have 12 clicks, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It's just that the 12 clicks do something. That was kind of like a joke around here. It was like, you don't need 32. But then when we got it, we were like, oh.
Well, what it is that there's a needle inside, and that needle is driven by threads, which is driven by the knob. And the knob has some detents, and there's little spring-driven balls in there. And all they're doing is they're simply giving you some tactile feedback. So if you weren't paying attention to like how many degrees you've turned the knob, or like in our case, it's got like a 17 millimeter like hex on the top. So, if you could count how many times that's gone around, that is equal to like how stiff or soft. But ultimately, the shock itself is infinitely adjustable. And all of those things, whether it's turns or degrees or clicks or whatever, It's all just different like reference points, but that thing is infinitely adjustable. Like you could leave it in between clicks. So it doesn't matter like what number of like click feedback, because that's only one way to like, kind of like break down all the different like points that exist in between full stiff and full soft. But the reason why it was necessary on the ultra high range one was that you need some more resolution when you have basically like a huge part of the shock's ability that you're not even going to be using. So when we went from 12 to 32, it's because like, whatever spring you have in there, it's only going to be on like one section of that graph.
Yeah.
So then, you need some like finer adjustments in that section of the graph. So I'm pretty proud of the ultra high range damper. I think that it saves you a lot of time. It allows customers absolute freedom as soon as they're placing an order to have a quick turnaround time on some special request for the spring, because we're just not changing the shock. It's just that like a turn of a knob can like, accommodate all kinds of people's different ideas about how they want their car to handle. So, you're getting your special order set of coilovers, just as fast as the one that, is just a slap and a label on the box.
Yeah.
Not much difference. It's very fast for Tommy to change springs. So if you ever have any special requests, you can just order a set of coilovers like straight off the website, and then you can drop Tommy an email, say this is the rate that I would like, and then you can kind of like hash out if that's appropriate for your request.
Right.
But if you send that email and you're like, I want this rate of spring, why don't you go ahead and you send him like a more qualified question that'll help him get your order out faster.
Yeah.
Like, this is what I do with my car. This is what kind of car it is. This is the motor I have. This is what the car is used for, or this is how I want it to look, or this is how I want it to perform. Give him like a little bit more meat to like back up, so he knows that, when you're requesting like a 14 kg where there was a 10, when you added that thing to cart, like, are you going to enjoy that for like your use case?
Yeah.
Or your goals?
I think it's important to not be bashful, like reaching out too, because I see people that, with any brand of coilover, like they might have a bad experience with the way that the car drives, and rather than just calling up, the representative at the company, whether it's us or somebody else, and being like, hey, I'm having these problems. I don't like the way that the car handles. What do you think? They just kind of internalize that they don't like the way that it works, and then maybe they sell them and get something else, and they just create all this extra work for themselves, and it could have been resolved with like a phone call and a little conversation.
I'm always so bummed when people just are inclined to switch first and then like ask questions later.
Yeah. Like
we're in the business of selling adjustable parts. They're highly adjustable.
Yeah.
So you can put them on the car and you can make the car like perform way worse or way better. And if even if you change your mind and your goals change, like that stuff can change with you. And I would much rather they pick up the phone than just like sell it on the used part market, use
marketplace,
used parts market. Yeah. And then even when a guy like, when it's the other way around and like a guy DMs me and he's like, I'm selling my WiseFab kit and I'm buying your knuckle. And then I'll be the one asking him questions. Yeah. Like, why? Because I don't want him to do it like again.
Right.
It's like, sometimes it's in my benefit. Like, I'm slanging this FDF kit and I'm buying yours. And I'm like, a lot of people like that stuff. Why? What was your experience with it? Like, what's the problem? Did you try different adjustments and, did you try different setups before you like came to this conclusion where you actually like have to like spend the money twice?
Now you have to
kit?
take a $500 hit and then buy another $2,000 kit and then be like, oh, it still doesn't
right.
work or whatever. Yeah.
And it's not like, it's
thanks for the business, but
I just want people to like, overall be able to like, reach their goals and complete their car project. So it's not like a zero sum game. It's not like if they have like some other like Engel kit that, will just like never get that customer's business because like, well, those guys don't make coilovers and they don't make all the arms and rods and they don't make the, solid bushings. And so it's like if a guy like gets a car, puts an Engel kit on it and then like switches that Engel kit, but the rest of the car isn't even done. He has like stock, like he has like ancient like blown bushings like in his entire like rear end and subframe, and that thing's just like rattling around in the car the car's driving like complete shit because it hasn't even been done.
Yeah.
You know, I would rather they like mix parts and finish the car and tweak a little bit on like what they have than, you know, just switch.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just a phone call away or an email away. And I think most those concerns could be fixed and changed. And I really enjoy that part of the job. Sometimes I spend a little bit too much time on the phone, just like dorking out with people about like, oh, you could try this, you could try that, but
they
that's
love
what I
chatting
like
with you.
Yeah. I think people really appreciate that.
People love stopping by.
So, yeah, it's and it's interesting. I mean, I think I've learned a lot just by having these conversations with people, and maybe like getting some things wrong like early on, and maybe pointing people down a certain path, and then you realize, oh, maybe this would have worked better this way, and you know, over the course of many years, we've like kind of come to a pretty good understanding of how things should work and what works for certain people and what doesn't. And but yeah, and then people change. You know, the trends change from one year to the next, and now people want to do this with their car, and people want to do that, and next year it'll be different. And like just continuing to have those conversations with people really helps me be able to help out the next guy that has a similar question. You know. Sometimes I get like the same question a couple times in a week, and the third time I have that conversation, the conversation is a little bit more in depth because I have like the information from the last two guys, and I think that's kind of cool.
Oh, my in-depth responses are like directly related to how much coffee I've had and how recently. So like my answers to DMs are like extremely like long and thorough and detailed, like if I'm actually drinking coffee at that moment. And then they just get like shorter and shorter and shorter as I get like busy doing stuff during the day. Yep.
By the end of the day, after having that conversation already a few times in one day, you're like, but.
So speaking of that, I think that a 30-minute podcast that you know gives people some ideas about shocks and springs is definitely something that they can consume during like drive to work.
I think so. I think this is a great idea.
I can let you get back to work, and you know, so that you don't have any angry customers because I've been chatting with you all day.
Yeah, I mean, this is awesome, and we should just like pick some different subjects that we have these conversations about internally, and just have a little podcast. Like we could do a whole nother one about helper springs and why they're important.
Dude, nobody understands helper springs.
Yeah. Speaking of springs,
like when I made the IG posts on helper springs. Dude, the conversation surrounding that is, it really backed up my belief that I needed to put that out there because like no one gets it.
Yeah, I mean, there's
quick little piece of advice: you can control the ratio between up travel and down travel on the shock. In other words, you can control like where in the shock shaft your car sits at static ride height. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if you uprate the springs, you'll just be like topped out on the travel. You'll be literally smashing. I tell people
it's the opposite of bottoming out. We all know bottoming out is bad, but topped out is also equally as bad.
Topped out is what the high kg spring does without a helper. So the helper spring lets you sit halfway down in shaft travel. You don't necessarily need to do that to lower your car because it's fully adjustable in the ride height, like in the insertion depth of that shock into the lower mount. But yeah, sometimes when you go through a driveway, you know, it's a little embarrassing to do three-wheel motion, and the helper spring is all about that. But yeah, exactly how to adjust that. Yeah, check out that Instagram video.
Link in bio.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks for taking the time, and yeah, we'll do it again soon.
Bye now.